This presentation is to talk about the Agile QMS, and it's really aimed at people at the beginning of the journey, for people who are moving from maybe the traditional document-based systems and want to go into Agile. But that said, I'm going to start the presentation with some learnings working with customers and be very interested to see what people think. Also, from what I've seen from the list, we have people from the software industry, we have people from industry, and we've got a few people in between. So it should be quite an interesting group of people. So looking forward to your comments. So before we go, just a bit of transparency. These are my views only, and it's clearly not advice. For educational purposes, there are examples from my own technical file in QMS. So this is not theoretical. This is something I implement in my own software product. And ultimately, the goal of this presentation is to make QARA professionals curious about Agile and start. So I went through the transition from document-based into Agile when I started my own software company. And I know the difficulty I had. It's not complicated, but it just does take a few things to get your head around. So there's no time like the present to start. So that said, a little bit about me. My background is I'm not a young man anymore, and I worked about nearly 20 years in finance in multinationals, did a lot of compliance work, a lot of ERP implementations across various industries. And then from 2012 to 17, I joined a startup medtech company, which was a topical silicone for wounds and scars. And I started as a CFO, and very quickly, within 6 weeks, I was the quality manager and the supply director. So in that business, we had an MS Office-based quality management system, and we actually ran the supply chain, about nearly $10-15 million of COGS on Excel. So very low tech, shall we say? But that's where I came from originally in terms of my medtech experience. And then since 2018, I've been developing QARA, which is pre-registration, but had my ISO certificate for a few years now with a SAMD scope. And I've got a bit of a split in my own business. My QMS is document-based because I did that first. And my technical files are all in Markdown files and pretty much done as a Docker's code. And you'll see some of that in this presentation. And since about 2021, I've been doing medtech consulting, mainly in 62304 compliance, a little bit of toolchain validation, some Agile compliance, and done a few very interesting product feasibility studies around the blockchain. So why are we here? I think we're in a very interesting stage of transition where a lot of the technology that was digital originally around quality management system is becoming outdated. And really what we're moving from is, with our systems, they were originally a digital representation of an outdated modality. And by that I mean, if we had digital representations of A4 documents on a screen, which we used to print on paper. And to be honest, I have a printer on my desk, but I hardly print anymore. And a lot of the clients I work with, they very rarely print. So we have this A4 representation, which we don't actually use for printing. And that also means that we had this world where the content and the format wasn't separated. So when I was in university, I used to write my essays on a piece of paper. And if I lost that piece of paper, I lost the content. And a lot of that's pretty much the same in the digital world. You have a document, in that document is your content. So where we need to move to, I think, in the industry is the Agile solution. And for me, what a big part of that is, you're separating the content and the format. And you focus on the content first, get it right, and then you can deploy the content to the format. So in the presentation, we'll review 3 basic QMS models, and we'll have a few things so I'm covering myself. I'm going to turn my camera off, just 1 second. We'll have a few very simple steps any QARA professional can do today to begin their Agile journey. So the problem this is the world that I see. We have a lot of QARA professionals working in their documents and their document-based quality management systems, looking very stressed because often it's a very stressful environment. And especially in the SAMD, the cloud-based environments, you get these very keen developers coming in. They're very excited to work in medtech, and they're happy at first, but eventually you get this conflict between the ways of working with agile development teams and traditional document-based systems and cultures. And one interesting thing I've seen for those software developers out there, where we had a very traditional document-based quality managers come and ask for every pull request to be approved by the SAP document management system. So, if you understand Agile, you understand that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But to be sympathetic to the document-based quality management systems, they've relied on these document-based systems for years and years to be compliant. And without a really true understanding of how Agile works, they've just gone to what they've known, okay? So we've got this problem where we have the old world and the new world colliding, especially around digital tech, and it highlights the problems between the two approaches to QMSs and technical files. So, as I said before, the big issue is we've got this content pretty much trapped in the format. So these documents, which were so useful to us in the past, they now become prisons for the content and causes lots of problems. Because, effectively, if you have one document, you can only deploy it to one PDF. But we have requirements on our QMSs where we may want to deploy it to manufacturing through paperless manufacturing onto tablets. We may want to put it to a website, in a product, what have you. And if it's buried in a Word document, Excel, any sort of MS Office document, we're really going to get stuck. So this really becomes a problem. And what we really want is this sort of system where you have data of different formats managed individually, and we just deploy that to where it needs to go. And I think, for everyone who has done any software development, we really appreciate the value of incrementalism. So you just clone a repo, you do incremental changes, you deploy. And that, as we'll see later on in the slide, saves a lot of effort, gives you a lot more control over your content. Now, I truly believe that we can do this in our industry without any conflict. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen a really good implementation. I've seen a lot of businesses slowly moving towards it. But I think we're in the stage now where we're in this really grinding conflict between the two modalities. And for the companies that move first and move fast, they can really use this as a competitive environment, as a real competitive advantage to their business. So if we look at a few very basic models on what sort of tool chains or systems we have for QMSs or technical file management, this is the first one, which is a traditional one. So across the top, we sort of have the main components of the system: project management, the applications that users interact with, where the data is stored, how it's deployed, and then ultimately where it's deployed. And so, I think we all recognize the traditional system. We're all working in Excel, Word, PDFs. They're stored on a file server. Project management could be some sort of document list in an Excel or document list in an EQMS. And generally what I've seen is deployment is, a lot of it is very manual from employees. Some EQMS systems are slightly more automated, but I also see with a lot of EQMS that there's from moving from a Word editable format into a PDF, there can be a lot of manual process as well. So I'm not going to go on about this. I think, anybody who's been around for a few years has worked in this way. And this model, I think, is becoming more and more popular. And it's actually a pretty good model for people moving from documents into something just, let's say, slightly more agile. So this is a browser-based system. So the difference in this is really probably twofold. Is we've got this ticketing on the left-hand side, and I've chosen Jira. You could use DevOps, or there's other project management systems out there. And that, for me, is a real game changer, because that gives you the ability as QARA professionals to do a lot of things. First of all, you can do clause by clause traceability into your SOPs, into your technical files, and you no longer have to guess, or you have to rely on your skilled individuals who tell you, yes, we're compliant, only to find out later in audits that something was missed. So JIRA, especially with the ticket-based system, linking tickets and doing coverage reports and verification reports, it really gives you that clause-by-clause control of your system. And then the Confluence bit, it's still a little bit clunky, but at least all of the content is in one place. And there are a lot of pretty good tools now in Confluence to do version management, access control, etc., to give you pretty good control over it. And then you do get this nice working between, at least in this case, Jira and Confluence, because they're designed to work together. And then the data is stored either in the cloud or on-premise, depends on your IT strategy. But again, what I see a lot of times in deployment, it depends where you keep your documents. Once you start PDF, putting Confluence content into a PDF, a lot of time that's done manually. So you go file, export, put it to your local server, upload into a document management system, for example. So again, you get a step forward to the advantages of an agile approach, but still, deployment of content can be a little bit manual, shall we say. And finally, I think this is what will become the gold standard, where we have this fully agile documentation as code approach, where pretty much the QARA people will work in the same way as developers work. And when you really think about the context of what QARA people do, what developers do, we generally have highly skilled employees sitting at keyboards typing text. So, coding, you're sitting in front of a keyboard, you're typing text. The difference is that code compiles and you can run programs, whereas the text as a QARA professional doesn't compile, but it has to comply to a lot of very complex regulations. And so once you get the teams working in the same way, you can start to get a lot of benefits, especially for those working for cloud-based systems. Because again, with this conflict, embedded software seems to work reasonably well with document management systems. I think that's been around a lot longer. But once you go into cloud, for some reason, it really breaks the system. And I think we'll see later, the real advantage here, additional to the advantages we've seen on from JIRA, which I said in the last slide, is we get the ability to build agents. So often, if you look at a technical file, it can be deployed to maybe 100 regulatory dossiers if you have a global footprint, for example. So you've got the same bit of content, intended use statement, which goes in the FDA, goes in the Canada Health, it goes in the EU, the UK, Australia, wherever it is. So there's a lot of duplication of content. And the nice thing about this approach is you can have source control on the content, and through the build agents, you can actually automate the building of your technical files. You can automate deployment of text to product websites, to in your content. And again, I haven't really touched a lot here on ERP. It's a little bit outside the scope, but you can get quite a nice interface there between your procedures, for example, your work instructions, and deploy on tablets, for example, into manufacturing, depending on how sophisticated you are in manufacturing or not, because there are some nice ways to do that. And again, the developers will understand that you get very much line by line control of your code. You can see everything that changes, and you get all the benefits of Git, which I'm not going to go into here, but Git is how we control code. And yeah, a lot of benefits. So moving on, the pros and cons. This is a short list. I think there's a lot longer list of benefits of Agile. So basically, the way this slide works, if you go down the page line by line, are the benefits of that we get from the systems, and then the traditional on the right hand side, a negative if it's worse for the traditional approach, and a positive if it's the benefit from the Agile approach. So looking to the future, there's a lot of benefit moving to Agile. You get visibility on your workflow, and traditionally I've seen QARA departments are generally not strong on work planning. So there's a lot of trust on employees to work in the documents. And if you're a QARA director, it can be very hard to understand what's happening in your organization. Whereas in software, you've generally got business analysts, scrum masters, whoever they are, managing the backlog, and you can manage workflow quite effectively. You can move to pre-hoc reviews as opposed to post-hoc review. So again, with traditional approaches, you generally review the final document, whereas you're working in Agile, there's a lot of pre-review, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the main advantages I can see here are the ones highlighted in green. With the Agile approach, especially with the JIRA approach, you can get clause level traceability. So you can look at a clause and you can run a query and you can see where that clause is implemented in your QMS and your product dossiers across the business. And you don't have to guess you're compliant. You can do a verification review and know you're compliant. Then also the other one too, when you get your content out of documents and into some sort of central repo, you prepare yourself for the coming revolution, I'll call it, of artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, where I can predict in the future, and I'm sure there's somebody's working on this now, that you can get this intelligent software to go through your technical files, go through your QMS, and identify where you're compliant, where you're not compliant, and whatever else you want it to do. And I think that's where we really get into a lot of the benefit, because we've got a lot of skilled resources in QARA. You're not far from being a lawyer, especially in RA. You've got to understand a lot of regulations, and then you've got to understand how to implement them. And we have all of these people doing very, low skilled work, file, save as, etc. So you can really free up a lot of intelligent resource in your organization to improve product cycles, the time of product cycles, of compliance risk, etc. And I think there's a short-term window also where if you're first in Agile and you get it right, that's going to give you strategic advantages. Increase your competitiveness, is going to reduce your compliance risk and potential financial liabilities, and potentially even increase your profits. So moving on, this is a very rough calculation based on what I would call the hidden cost of documentation. So as I just mentioned briefly before, we have a lot of very skilled people working QARA departments, and they're doing very sort of manual administration tasks of searching for documents, file save as, copy, export as PDF, load up, all these sort of things, which you kind of have to do under document management systems. Very hard to automate, very hard to outsource because they're embedded in the individual's workflow, and pretty hard to eliminate. And so I've just done a rough calculation here. So this left bar is the number of employees. So 500 is how high it is, 500 employees. And if you do a calculation, if you've got 500 employees, you've basically got 1 million hours of available resource to use in any year. So that's 500 employees times 48 weeks per year times 40 hours per week, okay? Now, if you assume that every one of those employees spends 1 hour a week doing non-value added administrative tasks, you lose 250,000 hours per year, which is equivalent to losing 12.5 of your employees. Now, it may not sound like much, but I can guarantee that across the organizations, you're probably losing more than an hour of a week on non-value added tasks. And then when you add in meetings where people are forced to meet in synchronous ways, i.e. they need to be in the same room at the same time, as opposed to when you're on Agile tools, there's a lot of asynchronous ways of working. So you don't have to have these big meetings. You can work, in different, how do I explain it? Not at the same time with ticketing. Then you can really get a lot more efficiency out of your organization. There's a few things you need to do to change to your organization to get it, but there's a big win. And if you look at it, on a 5-year non-discounted NPV, the cost of that, assuming it's total overhead costs are about 200,000 per employee. You're looking at 12.5 million over 5 years. What's that? About 2.25 million over per year of potential efficiency savings. So what are some of the things we can do? So okay. So what are some of the things we can do? So if you've never done Agile before, one of the really important things to do is to actually learn the tools. So, if you're old enough like me, I had to learn Word. I'd never used it before. I came from a paper world into a digital world. This is of a similar sort of level of learning. It's not difficult, but these tools work in very different ways to the Word documents, okay? Word and Excel documents. And the good news is a lot of these tools are free. You can sign up to GitHub, to JIRA. You can install an IDE anytime on your computer. You can learn. There's a lot of YouTube videos. You can talk to a developer. You can hire a freelancer online. They're pretty cheap if you go offshore. If you've got employees, give them a mini project to set it up. And I think the most important thing is to learn them while applying it to a use case. Okay, so that's coming up next. So a good use case to do would be a compliance use case. So here you can see in the screenshot, and I'm happy to stay on the call and I can share more information if we want to go deep, is a report, a Confluence report, which has the my procedure on the left is my post-market surveillance plan. And I can see the clauses that I'm satisfying with this section of the PMS. So I've got the purpose section, and then I'm complying with MDR Article 84, MDR Annex 3, 1.1, etc., etc. So I can run the report this way, or I can reverse it. I can look at the clause and see which sections of my system are satisfying that clause. And when I'm doing my technical file, I run it both ways to make sure I'm covered. Hit a refresh button, no problem. And to do that, you just need to create a JIRA project. You create a regulatory ticket per clause. You also create a ticket per SOP step, link the tickets, create the report, and review it. So not hard once you know, but to learn it the first time can be a little bit cumbersome. But I tell you what, this is super powerful. In my business, I'm the responsible person. I'm the guy who goes to jail. I trust myself, but I'd rather have the ability to sit down and review it and know at any one time how I did it, okay? Another use case you could do is computer system validation. So again, I see a lot of big companies are still holding on to their document-based computer system validation. And for the last client, we had a lot of discussions about it. You can do very good computer system validation using Word, and there are all these tools to do it, where you can use your Word documents and link things. But again, I think, once you've moved to the world of Agile or ticketing tools, there are a lot better ways to do it, a lot nicer ways to do it too. So again, it reduces the administrative overhead, gives you a lot more control over your systems, a lot more visibility. And every time you need to revalidate, it's a simple increment as opposed to, what can be very heavy rework in a document-based system. So again, it's pretty simple. You create a JIRA project, create requirement tickets, create test tickets, etc. Run your tests, create coverage reports. And what I've got here, this is a JIRA plugin called Links Explorer. I've got the core issue here. In this case, this is my software product. I've got the software requirement here. I can see the parent it's part of, so that's the grouping it's part of. I can see what product requirement causes the software requirement. I can see what development ticket is caused. What development ticket is caused by the software requirement, and which test ticket tests that requirement. And it's pretty simple to review. If I want to get a view to make sure everything first of all is covered, I can just scroll down the page, look for any gaps. And then when I want to review how well the requirements satisfy each other, I can run reports with the detail in it and review it with the team. And we can, look for improvements or say, okay, that's pretty good, and move on. And I just say, jump here. The important thing here, I think, if you've never done Agile before, don't get nervous about breaking your system, because your current system is pretty important, okay? And we don't want to lose what we've got. But I think, you can start very simply outside your current system, learn until you get confidence. And then when you're confident enough, you see the benefits. You not hope you get the benefits, believe you're going to get the benefits. then you can look at a proper Agile implementation. The important one here is to talk to people inside and outside your organizations about your current system and find out what they hate, what they like, where the pain points are, what's important, value added junk, what we can do better, whatever you can come up with. And I think this is probably a good check for QARA departments. I know when I was head of quality, I just didn't have the bandwidth to get feedback. It's like, that's the way we're going to do it. We have to be compliant. We don't have the resource to do it. But if you want to really get ahead of your competitors, get ahead of your, be a strategic partner to the business, I think it's important now to ask these questions. And the good news is that with Agile, if you're coming from document-based, you can actually deliver and help the business, greatly. So, find out what they want and then follow up with a good implementation. The other thing you can do is start writing your requirements down. So get your feedback, what you think. Start writing requirements for your, your system that produces your quality management system, your technical file system. And again, just like in the past, where I never realized that my content and my formats were linked together, I don't see a lot of QARA departments looking at holistically what they want to do, what they need to achieve with their systems. And we'll come on to later how you actually achieve what you want. And it all comes to good requirements, right? So again, software world, product world, write good requirements, you're probably going to have a better product. And if you start thinking about your QMS as a product, there's a lot of things you can do, write good requirements, and then go implement them. And again, here, this could be a good exercise. Start a JIRA project, create a ticket per requirement, start to use it, and start to use collaborative tools with your team, with your directors, with your board, whatever, to get feedback, review it, and groom and improve your requirements. And finally, sketch your architecture and ask why. Sketch your current architecture. And again, I don't think I've ever seen, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I've never seen an architecture for a tool chain landscape for a QMS. Often the landscape is simple. It's a Word document on a file server, with a Adobe sign, or it's it's a SAP bit of software, EQMS software. And the architecture is there, but it's not explicitly written down. And what you want to do, I think, for now is to, especially if you're going to move to Agile, it's really important to understand your data types. Is it text? Is it circuit diagrams? Is it code? Is it, I don't know what? There could be, a bunch of different data types you've got out there. And if you're going to move to an Agile approach, you have to understand how you're going to handle those data types in your system, right? So how are people going to interact with that? How are you going to control access? How are you going to review it? Where are you going to store it? How are you going to deploy it? These sort of things. So, your data is your content ultimately, and it's important to do an inventory of that. The other one, what components of your system? What are your employee-facing applications? What's your storage, your build agents, where you're going to deploy it, etc. Do architectural diagrams and put boundaries around your systems. Look at your interfaces. How does data interface with other components of the system? How does it interface with users? How does it interface with external parties? And the processes to do that. And again, from my point of view, when I came from traditional QMS, I never did this, but now I've got a software product. I need to architect my product, and I've used the learning to architect my product to come back to my quality management system and architect that. And it's very powerful to do. And if you're looking for the efficiencies, especially, you can do an architecture of your QMS and then feed that back to your organizational design. Because I think what you're going to work out is you're highly skilled, highly paid people who really are into the regulations or a deep part of the QMS. They're the ones you want managing your content, making sure it's perfect, running the queries, talking to people, but you don't want them to do the manual tasks. And a lot of the manual tasks with Agile, you can push into a build agent, to a DevOps team, for example, when you're ready to deploy, and then prior to deployment into the project management. So I predict that in the future, QARA department will have a project manager, which will run sort of a JIRA board and give good overview of workflow and where we are on compliance. And that's something you can go up to the board or the senior management and give them a good overview. And there'll also be, I've made up a term, QARA ops, QARA ops, just like we have DevOps in software, where they'll be responsible for deploying your content to, regulatory agencies, to manufacturing, to your document management system. And again, once you understand this technology, and I know there are a lot of people on the call who do, you can get a lot of efficiencies. So I'm going to leave it there. I've sort of done the 30 minutes. I've just finished reading a new book called Atomic Habits. I think it's a bit hot at the moment. And what they talk about there to, get achievements is just to stack the wins, just get micro wins, micro wins, micro wins until you're ready to do, a proper implementation. And if we look at this stack, look at the tools, the functions, the methods, do something with it. Like I proposed, do a mini project on a procedure, a CSV, whatever. Start to use it on a regular basis. Find out how you can benefit, et cetera, et cetera. Lead others until you can adopt, new ways of working. And as you can tell, well, hopefully you can tell, I'm pretty positive about Agile, because I've lived in that old world. I've consulted to clients who are kind of stuck in between the old document-based system, working with Agile teams, and they're really struggling organizationally. In my own business, I've implemented my, over the last 6 months, I've implemented my technical file into documentation as code. And we're on the second release now of that. And I'll tell you what, it's so much easier than it was before. And I'm going to stop there. And I want to really thank everybody for attending. I know everybody's very busy. And I'll open it up to questions. So I have access to the chat here. So if you've got a question, please drop it into the LinkedIn chat. If you want to contact me separately, I am a consultant. So, obviously you're free to hire me, but I'm also very happy to speak to anyone, anytime. About any questions you might have. So again, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure presenting to you, and drop some questions in the chat if there's anything you'd like to ask.